Hello, I'm Rajat Matthew Bose, and this is me.
Rajat, that's new.
Well, kind of. It's more of a revisiting, really. It's old, really, as old as me, because technically it's actually my name, my real name. I'm actually half Indian, so I've sort of claimed it kind of over the last few months, just as an experiment. And yeah, it's going okay.
And why didn't you use it to begin with?
Uh, well, really, it was like partway through my life that I dropped it. When I really started acting, it became clear to me that, as I say sort of glibly, but it's true, is that I realized I was just too brown and too gay. So I thought, well, I can do something about the brown. I can try and hide the gay. I don't know. I mean, it was confusing, really. But and looking back, I feel sorry for myself, if you like, having to do that. But it just became a sort of obvious thing then, I think. I'd been dealing with the brown part, if you like, of being Rajat for a long time. I think people find it very difficult to believe that when I was at school, at secondary school, there were only two brown ethnic kids in the whole school. It was a huge comprehensive, and there were only two of us. And I was half Indian, the other chap was fully Indian. And when I arrived for my very first day there, I was sat next to him. So we'd been placed in the same class on the same desk together, which my mother found completely unacceptable. But I didn't think anything of it really, because I was sort of used to being the odd one out, if you like. And but you realize very quickly that we were the only kids of any color in the school, and there were hundreds and hundreds of kids. So it's sort of, I struggled along with it, really. I just accepted that nobody could say my name. And I've got called everything from Ajax to Crackerjack to Rancid to Rashid to Rash to Raj, you name it. And, I just sort of accepted it. And when he was called Zari and I walked along the corridor, people used to go, look, Twix, which we sort of, we found funny then. You sort of laughed along with people. I mean, looking back, I think, God, that's just awful. But I don't know, it's sort of part of, it was so long ago, it's intrinsically part of who I am, I think. And I grew up on an estate, I mean council, not country, because this is all invented now. But the council part was that I wanted to be part of the group. But they used to call me all sorts of things. They used to treat me like I was a black person. So sing "See You at Tea Time" to me and stuff for Robinsons and Jam. And it was just, at the time, I didn't realize how horrific it was, I suppose. It was just sort of the way of things. And, I think they would say, oh, we didn't mean anything by it and all that sort of thing. But to fit in, I laughed along and went along with it, So then when it came to really the chance, I suppose, came when I went to America to study acting. They were very clear about the fact that being called Rajat or Raj or even Raja or something more known, like Raj and Raja would have been, was still unacceptable. And I would absolutely just be cast as some sort of, just terrorist roles, basically, is what they said. So they encouraged me very actively to take on my English name completely and drop the Rajat totally, and in fact sort of erase it from my background, if you know what I mean, so that I didn't really seem to be from anywhere. And I think by then, because I was sort of sick of trying to explain my name and I just didn't know where it made me fit in. I just didn't fit into anything, that I thought, actually, I'll go with this and I'll drop it. So I became
How did your sexuality then factor into that feeling?
Well, I suppose the sexuality issue was there all along, underlying it. I think that when I was growing up, I wasn't aware of being gay as a thing. It was this sort of nebulous concept, I think. I didn't have the frame of reference for it. I didn't have the language for it, as I think young people do now. And I myself indeed do. But then I didn't have any concept of what it meant, really. I'd only ever heard of it in a negative way, or it was somebody mimsing about with a limp wrist, and it was John Inman on, Are You Being Served? That kind of thing. So it always felt like a negative thing to me. And to be honest, I didn't really relate to it. I didn't look at men on the beach, or, you know, builders in the summer with their shirts off, sort of thing, thinking, hello. I didn't really, and I was terrified of it, actually. And when I went to sixth form, because sixth form just when suddenly there was sex everywhere, wasn't there? Everyone was sort of drowning in hormones, and everyone was supposedly at it or talking about it, or somebody was copping off or shagging, or whatever the phrases were there. I was horrified by all that. Somebody told me in biology what people did, and I thought, they don't, that's revolting. And so I thought, I don't fancy that at all. I really wanted just, which has sort of now become famous, is all I wanted was one of those pencil cases with the tops that you slid and then slid open. That is literally was my life until I was about 18. I wanted that more than anything, and some new Caran d'Ache pencils, because I love color pencils. So that was my sex. And so when suddenly people were saying to me, so what's your, you know, who do you fancy, or do you fancy so-and-so? I was thinking, no, I don't even know what that means, actually. And I found myself, when people said, oh, you're gay, I'd think, I'm not, because gay at that point had a negative connotation to me. So, and I thought, but it was less about the shame or denying something that I was embarrassed about, but more about the fact that I literally had no realization or concept of what it meant. So when someone, to this day, when people say, are you gay? Part of me thinks, it depends what you mean. You know, it depends on how your, you know, what your parameters for being gay are, you know. And I think the wonderful thing now is that young people have this incredibly fluid platform to decide where they fit in, you know. But I don't know, looking back, if I had what I would have become in the acronym of our community. So it's sort of, I think it was underlying all of that, but the sort of brown part, if you like, sort of superseded it at first. But then when I started acting, the two clashed and came together, and suddenly I had a double whammy of things that I felt I had to hide or somehow just pretend was something else, or try to, you know, present in a different way and camouflage.
Mm. And for someone who was sort of detached from that side of things, then you became a famous telly-gay in Emmerdale. That must have been a bit of a gear change.
Well, you see, it was, because up until that point, what I realized was that I was only ever cast in roles that were non-sexual. So I hadn't been sexualized. As long as I wasn't being sexualized in the character, it didn't really matter that I was brown, gay, whatever I was. I could just be that person. So it didn't matter. But, you know, if it was somebody who was going to be getting the girl or whatever, then I wasn't being included in that. So then came Emmerdale, when suddenly I was sexualized, and the sexuality was a part of the character. But the brilliant thing about what Emmerdale did, and the character Paul, is that he wasn't defined by his sexuality. His sexuality was just there. It was this sort of backdrop to him. And his real issues were about his wayward sister and mother and all of that, and just trying to be a lad who wanted a family and sort of create this nice situation at home. And the fact that, you know, as a character and as an actor, I was kissing men and wearing drag and having weddings was sort of, I felt earned. I felt that the show had earned those moments and didn't exploit them, which is very important, I think. They weren't just bolted on, they weren't just shoehorned in. They were there with reason and given space and breath and explained. And so it was wonderful to be part of that, to be honest.
And TV is an amazing way to communicate those sorts of experiences and stories with an audience that is unfamiliar with them.
Well, soaps do have a unique platform from which to tell stories. They have, I think, out of every show that you see on television, it's the intimacy of television for a start, but people invest in those characters. And I think they have a responsibility, therefore, to tell those stories properly. I think if you shoehorn somebody or something, a storyline or whatever, into something that people know that that's not right, you know. So when it comes to character, especially if you're representing anyone in our community of our acronym, you have to tell their story properly with dignity, but also explain it properly, because you're educating, you're also giving a platform, you're challenging, you're giving an opportunity for the society around to understand these things. And soap can do that from a unique platform. They have absolutely that place to do that. And I think it's very important to do it. And I think that Emmerdale, especially when I was on the show, did that with Paul well, actually. There were, moments, but I think that largely they stood behind it, and I think they want to tell those stories properly. The writers on Emmerdale are brilliant, and they're experienced people who like to tell stories properly. And I think more than anything, though, the audiences actually like that. They like a story to be told properly, and they know when it's not being, because they instinctively know that. And I think it's a responsibility we have as actors as well to make sure we take part in shows and create characters that tell those stories properly.
So, speaking of that, you were in It's a Sin. How was that?
What a joy. The thing is that, I always think that, when people talk about celebrity, just as a tiny tangent, I always think, bleh, because I think celebrity is absolutely foul and disgusting. But the one thing it's brilliant for is that it gives a voice to people who don't have a voice. And that's the only purpose of it, in my mind. Anything else is absolutely bogus. But the brilliant thing about It's a Sin, I think that Russell did so wonderfully, was that he created a world that people would relate to and understand, who were there, but people who weren't there would be educated by, without glossing, without sugarcoating. He just created and presented it and just left it out there. And I really wanted to be part of it. I lived through that time, and I think what's been so important since is a lot of people who have watched it, who are younger, have sort of understood part of the layering of who gay man, in my case, like me, is because of that experience, because they can kind of see how these things have affected and have influenced the choices you make, and how one is now, and why it's taken me till this grand old age to not give a shit.
Do you think that your work is better for you being more honest with yourself, more open, more in touch with yourself?
100%. I think I am a better person all round, frankly. I think I'm a better friend, I'm a better partner, I'm better all of those things. But because I don't give a fuck now, and I don't care if somebody thinks this, that, and the other thing about the gay thing or the brown thing or anything. I just don't give a shit. I just think that's your issue, you go and deal with it. But I'm happy to have a conversation about it, because if you're willing to, one of the things that came out of It's a Sin, which you'll be aware of, is that Russell made it very clear that all the queer parts were being cast deliberately and played by queer actors. And suddenly my social media bubble was full of people going, "Ooh, actors are just actors, they can play what they want," kind of thing, and they should just be actors. And part of me just thinks, yeah, you can say that, because all the people who said it were either established working actors or straight white males. And I just think to myself, sit down, pin your ears back, listen to what's happening, and you might learn something, because you don't understand, you're saying that from a point of privilege. It's not a level playing field. It's a seesaw, if you like, of jobs, and the parts that are gay are this tiny light thing that's way up in the air because it's way down the other side of the seesaw by all the straight parts. And having been played high profile gay, it means that now, you did in this country, especially, we do this thing that says, Rajat Matthew or Matthew Bose, then age, which is always made up because I make it up, and then it says gay actor Emmerdale, as if those are the things that define me. So my age defines me, my sexuality, and the fact that I was on Emmerdale, those are my defining things. So when those people who go, "Oh, actors are just actors," are in a position where we're all in, where the people who actually make the choices, the people producing and casting and putting the money down and signing on that dotted line, do so without any ageism, any sexism, any color issues, any gender, any sexuality, you name it, anything. When they fully do that, 100%, which in parentheses, by the way, I don't think will ever happen, then we can all go, yeah, the best person got the job, or then actors are just actors. That's great. But until that moment, it's bullshit. And to say that is so, so rude and so dismissive to the people who are on the fuzzy end of the lollipop, to quote Miss Thing, who are just getting, I don't get put up, to come full circle, for sexualized roles because I'm a known out gay man. So yeah, I can go up and play gay roles, but you don't get those other things. And of course you then get Russell Tovey or Luke Evans, people like that pushed, well, what about, you go, yeah, but what about them? exceptions that prove the rule and all that sort of thing.
Mm. So from someone who couldn't find their place back in the day when you were a youngster, where is your place now?
Well, it's two parts, really. Mentally, it's in the I don't give a shit, that room of, so what? And then what? And I love that challenge. There is a part of me that now looks at people and says, and then what? What are you going to do about it? Which is brilliant. I love that part of myself. And part of the rebranding, actually, as Rajat and Raj, is that Raj is much more up for that. He doesn't give a shit. So I love that, actually, because it's like I've got this new personality now that I can take forward. But a lot of it really is just the fact physically, I'm in a very different place because I now spend a lot of time in nature. So I have this piece of rough land that I've acquired, and because I wanted to rewild it, I'm obsessed with bees and all that sort of thing. I know nothing, let me just say, I know nothing about nature at all. Baffles, bewilders, terrifies me. I'm scared of everything. And so it's actually been brilliant for me because I've had to embrace to do this thing, which I thought was this sort of kind of abstract concept of rewilding, which sounds so cool and trendy. And I like to be trendy. As if. And I thought, I can do that. I like to plant flowers and I can grow a cabbage. But it turns out I'm hopeless at that. But nature tells you, because nature's got it all worked out. So it's all fine. And relinquishing that control, it has done wonderful for my anxieties, actually. It's wonders for it. It's just made me relaxed. And I just think, so I was going to do some work with some crops. So I've gone from, just thinking I'm going to rewild some stuff and put an allotment in, to having a field of crops. I'm thinking of rescuing some dairy cows and rehoming them. And I've got all these grand plans now because it just happens when it happens now. Things take the time they take with nature. And if the sun doesn't shine and the crops are flattened by the wind, what can you do? So I like that, actually. It's sort of, I find that calming, bizarrely.
Rajat Matthew Bose, thank you very much.
You're very welcome, thank you.
Hello, I'm Lesley Sirrel, and this is me.
Lesley, tell me how you met your wife.
Well, it's an interesting story, or at least I like to think that it is. So once upon a time, I was a young thing going about in the gay scene in Aberdeen, and I met in with quite a few nice young ladies at the time. And consequently, there ended up being 5 of us who shared a flat, 2 couples, and me as the kind of single girl about town. And my now wife was in a couple with someone else. We really liked each other and we were quite attracted to each other, but she was in a couple, I was single, so it just didn't work out. We did at some point have a fleeting moment, more commonly known as a little one-night stand. Way back when, and it was pleasant, it was all right, but things just didn't work out then. We lost touch, as you do quite often with people. You kind of drift in and out of kind of friendships, and quite a few years ago now, with the event of Bebo and Friends Reunited prior to Facebook, we got back in touch, found out that I was single, she was single, so we decided to meet up and just have a chat and a catch up. And kind of that was it. We were kind of together all the time after that. So that was about 2009. And consequently, after quite a number of years together, living quite happily, we had a very unromantic wedding proposal. I was going to turn 40. We were going to have a little party, go on a little holiday. And we decided that we may as well make that a wedding and a honeymoon. So it wasn't a grand affair, it wasn't a big affair or anything like that, but it suited us. And what we decided to do is that this next year coming, my wife Tracy will turn 50. So we're going to do it all again with a wee bit more grandeur and a little bit more style in sunny Dumfries and Galloway. So that's how it's going to go. So we'll get a little princess fairy tale wedding and see how that goes.
When you were young, did you like fairy tales, and did you dream of happy ever after?
Probably not in the conventional kind of sense. I was a little schemy council little child. Grew up in a single parent family with not a lot of extra trimmings on that kind of thing, but didn't really want for anything. We had family holidays. We had, days out to the cinema and days out to the swimming pool and things like that. don't think I was really the fluffy, frou-frou kind of child, you know, didn't really want princess dresses and stuff like that. But, you know, as an adult, you kind of dream of being in love, settling down and just having a really happy kind of life. I've never really wanted extravagant kind of things in life. I'm quite happy with a, you know, just being comfortable kind of situation. But I think it's something that you grow into as you grow up. You know, the idea of being in love when you're younger is very different to the idea of actually being in love when you're older. There's a middle ground there somewhere, and hopefully everybody manages to find a little piece of that at some point in their life. But, you know, you can have a fairy tale wedding and a big kind of, you know, fancy kind of venue, and sometimes it just doesn't work out despite that. So I don't think that's what makes it the right thing for you, you know?
And what's the key to a successful, happy relationship, do you think?
For me, trust and honesty. If you can't trust the person that you're with, if you find that you're wanting to check their phone or open their mail or check messages, or you don't trust where they're going, that's not the right relationship for you. That's obviously not a good fit. And I think in all situations in a relationship, if you can at least be honest, if there's times when you don't feel very sexual, or if you don't feel, you know, very touchy-feely, or you don't want to be sociable, it's as well to be honest rather than put yourself in situations that are stressful and awkward and can also add stress to your relationship. If you don't feel that you can be honest about who you really are or how you're feeling about things, then that for me doesn't work. So thankfully with Tracy, and she's very much on a similar kind of vein to me, we are honest about everything. We're honest about our mental health, we're honest about our physical health, we're honest about our feelings, how we're feeling, you know, how we feel about certain situations, and there's no judgment. It is what it is. You just say your piece and you move on.
Do you think if you'd got together when you'd first met, you'd still be together now?
We've spoke about this. We have had the, you know, how do you think that would have went? And I think it might have went well for a while, but I was a very different person at 19 to the person that I am at 46. And ultimately, none of the relationships that I had when I was younger were very long lasting. I think my longest relationship was around the 2-year mark. I never really went past that. I think as things got serious, as you know, you get houses and jobs and mortgages and things crumbled, because I was a very different person back then. So no, I think if we got together, I'd like to think it's this everlasting love and it's like falling in love, you know, fairy tale. But ultimately, I don't think we'd have been together now had we gotten together then. Consequently, we've gotten together a few years later when we were in our 30s, and we're now 46 and 49. We've been together for nearly 12 years. So, you know, that for me, that works. I'd rather have waited till later in life and found someone I truly want to be with and truly can spend the rest of my life with, rather than have had another failed relationship when I was younger.
What advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, so many things, you know. I think I would tell myself not to sell myself short. I always underestimated myself or didn't believe that I was as good or better than other people. So I wouldn't want to sell myself short. And I think I would most definitely tell my younger self that sex is no love. I went out in search of love every night on the gay scene, different discos, different girls. There was lots of sex, and I'm not saying that was a bad thing. It was what it was in the early 90s, but sex is not love. Definitely not.
Lesley, Sirrel, thank you very much.
I'm Jonathan Kemp, and this is me.
You're a writer, Jonathan.
That's right.
Why do you write, and what do you write?
I write, therefore I am. I don't question too much why I write, because I think, you know, there needs to be, you know, a certain mystery. If you dissect it too much, perhaps you'd stop. But I think I write because I feel the books that I write, the things that I write about, they aren't in the world, and so I write them so that they are. No two people walk the same path. And however much I write for a community, I also write for myself, or the things that I perceive and the ways in which I perceive them, how life is for me. I mean, I don't expect it to necessarily represent others. When it does, and touches others, it's the best reward. But I write because not to is inconceivable to me.
So tell me about your writing.
Primarily, my writing just focus on queer communities, queer histories, and those marginalised aspects of our lives that are often occluded. My first novel, for example, London Triptych, focused on a 100-year history of London through the eyes of kind of 3 male prostitutes.
Mm-hmm. Is writing autobiographical?
Winterson said there is no such thing as autobiography, there's only art and lies. I like to think there's a little bit of both in what I do. I think you inevitably, as I said earlier, you write about, or I write about life as I perceive it. So therefore, there is a certain amount of autobiography in there. I don't directly write autobiography, but what is autobiography? If I include a story that I was told by somebody else, I mean, it's part of my life. I think there's a greater liberty with fiction than with autobiography, because you're not committed to tell the truth in such a way. Cocteau said, "I am the lie that tells the truth." I think to assume that you're most suited to tell your life is not necessarily a correct assumption. So it's autobiographical, and yet at the same time it isn't. It's the crucible of creativity in which it all takes place is kind of a weird vessel.
Yeah. You said it was inconceivable for you not to write. Is it enjoyable writing?
I hate writing. I love having written, Dorothy Parker once said. I think most writers hate the process when it's difficult and love it when it's not. There are moments when you've broken through, but for each one of those moments, there are the other 100 moments where you're struggling and banging your head against the wall. I love the process, even the horrible bits, the difficult bits. It's the kind of the necessary evil of the solitude, the kind of the frustration, but then the absolute joy of kind of nailing it.
Writers are magpies. Writers have a shard of ice in their heart. What's the nicest thing you've heard someone say about a writer?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting the way in which I don't know if other writers would say this, but I find that I seem to be the kind of person that people will tell things to, and there are quite a few things that I've been told that I just know I could never ever use if I wanted to retain friendships. There is I don't know, it's a slither of ice, I suppose, but that slither is lodged in a heart. The heart is bigger than the ice, I like to think. But there is a calculation, there is a distance, I think. I often call it a narrativization. Things can be happening, and you're already thinking this is great material. In the middle of sorrow and tears, you're kind of jotting notes down mentally. I think that's what stands writers apart. They are the person who will be distanced, sometimes from themselves, but sometimes from the action, the moment, because there's a kind of recording process taking place, I think. There's a kind of...
So is that not quite isolating?
I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for anyone but myself. I think isolation is the human condition as such. I have a tattoo on my arm saying "never knowing, never known." I think that isolation is just part and parcel of who we are. If it's more amplified or magnified in a writer, then maybe. But isolation is just part of the package, really.
Which writing are you most proud of recently? What writing? Was that like asking you to choose your favourite child?
Yeah, you can't have favourites. I think there are sentences that I'm proud of. I think maybe London Triptych, because it's just still there, it's still in the world. Like, you know, last summer was its 10-year anniversary, and it's still selling reasonably well. I still get you know, messages from people who've just finished reading it, saying how much they enjoyed it. Those kind of rewards make you proud, you know. Personally, the thing I'm most proud of probably is the last novel, Ghosting, which was, I often say, a kind of collaboration between myself and my late mother, elements of whose life were narrativized and dramatized in this novel. I would not say it was her biography or I was telling her story necessarily. Again, there's not a point-for-point correspondence between, you know, what happened and how it's told. But give a man a mask and he'll tell you the truth, as Wilde said. And it's in the mask, in the adoption of art or artifice, that something gets told that can't be told, for me anyway, in any other way. And to get that novel out and to vocalize, you know, a 63-year-old woman's life successfully was something I was very proud of. Yeah.
And if you had to write your own epitaph, what would it say?
Never knowing, never known. I don't know. I wouldn't have one. It'd just be blank. Yeah.
People to write in their own meaning.
Yeah, I'm like a whiteboard and a marker pen.
Jonathan Kemp, thank you very much.
I'm Rachel Reese. This is me.
You trained as a lawyer. Is it more important to be right or to win an argument?
Well, if it's the right argument, it's always important to win it. I trained as a lawyer. I never practiced, but I went to law school in the 90s. But as a trans woman back then, it was very difficult to get a role as a trans person. So I ended up going into a sort of senior administrative role at a university instead, and worked my way up there.
You were also a software engineer.
I was, yeah.
Analytical brain involved in that.
Yeah, I mean, it was back in the 1980s. I trained to be an avionics engineer in the defense industry. This is where my male expression, very male-orientated environment. But, you know, my father was an engineer, wanted me to be an engineer too. So I read software engineering at university in the 80s. And I joined GC Marconi, British Aerospace now, sat there writing code for tornadoes and submarine detection equipment and all that stuff. But I kind of missed human beings, so I moved into HR just as the Berlin Wall was coming down. And as a result of that, spent a lot of time in employment tribunals and got an interest in law. And that's why I retrained as a lawyer in the 90s. So yeah, I've had a few careers.
And when so you mentioned being a trans woman, there wasn't finding a place in law was difficult. When did you understand that you were trans, or when did you come to terms with that, and kind of what stage is that?
Long and windy road. I put my first dress on in 1971 at primary school, and lots of other boys did as well, but then obviously they stopped doing that and I didn't. And I suddenly realized that I was different, but I didn't really have the language. And it took a while, really. I thought I was the only person that was like that. There was only 2 television channels in the 70s, both black and white, not a lot of trans and non-binary programming on the telly then. And so very kind of dark, guilty secret. I was bullied quite a lot at school because I was quite effeminate, and people knew that I put a dress on at primary school. So really vicious, nasty schooling. And that drove it into a very dark secret. And even at university, and I would cross-dress at all the parties that going, if there was a drag, Vickers and Tarts, I would go in, anything to express my female identity. And then it was really in my 20s I met a cross-dresser, and I thought, well, you're not me, but at least there's two of us in the world that do this. And it was only really when I moved to London, and I started working. I went to a club called the Bell. It was a pub at the end of Pentonville Road in Northumberland Avenue. It was kind of a tea dance on a Sunday night, 1989-90. And I met some of the Madame Jojo girls, and I thought, wow, there are other people like me. And I kind of started to find my community. And I started to go to Ron Storm's and the Way Out Club and Phil Beach and Ted's Place and all these great places. Some of them aren't around anymore. And I met my community. And that's how I knew that I was trans, and I knew that I could do something about my gender identity. It took a while to break through, making sure that I could be financially secure and tell family and find the right employer. And eventually I transitioned, and that was 20 years ago. But, that's, my journey finally got there. And I had a couple of bots attempt trying to transition, but it takes a while for some of us to really work out how we're going to find a way, how we're going to make a living, how we're going to make sure we're safe. And, then I, transitioned, and I never looked back.
And how you talked about being a sort of dark secret, how do you shed the shame that society puts onto you?
Well, you don't, and you take a lot of battle scars. It's no saint that, I hit the club scene pretty hard in London, and that's a dark scene. It was back then. A lot of the girls that I work with are on the game. Some of my friends died of AIDS. We were all, very drug heavy, pretty heavy druggy scene. And the scene was kind of dark, and I was living two lives. I was working in male expression and living, and then clubbing out as Rachel and trying to live as Rachel as much as I could outside. And, I had battle scars, lots of danger, lots of risk. And I think that in my early 20s and my teens, that period, I was very dark, never took joy in anything. And I can remember the suicidal thoughts, the darkness that encapsulated me. I know I was, I really hit that club scene hard. I was on, I did the stuff that really did ecstasy and all the other stuff, and hit the club, danced my heart away, because I felt that was my community. But it wasn't. The club scene was so dark that when I went back into sort of my daytime jobs and things, these two worlds that existed in parallel that never came together, just had this kind of, madness. It was just craziness for me, and it nearly drove me insane. It was only when I transitioned and my two worlds came together that my whole life made sort of sense, and that I suddenly became a joyful person and came out into the light in a way. I felt like a vampire because I was only ever out at night on the scenes in London, and suddenly I was out in the daytime and had a good job, and left the club scene and got back onto the rails. I lost so many friends who didn't come back out into the light. As I say, so many of the people that I was with back then didn't make it. And I think people have lost that history because now it's not great being trans and non-binary in the UK, but mainly people can transition their gender expression in comparative safety. Back then you couldn't, and it just feels, I think a lot of people have missed that, how dark that scene was just 25 years ago. We've come a long way.
This may be a silly question. How did it feel to discover or rediscover joy?
Well, it's a quote I think from Star Trek, because a lot of my friends are Star Trek fans. There's a line, he said, "What's it like in the Nexus? It's like living inside joy." And for me, that's what my life is like. I sleep, I exercise, I eat well, I travel, I read, I take time to enjoy my moments. I'm engaged. I'm getting married to another trans woman this year in 4 weeks' time. I've set up, thank you. I set up a trans and non-binary inclusion company 5 years ago. I love being self-employed. I love working with my clients. I mean, life is good. I mean, the transphobia in the UK is shockingly horrible, and that's why I set the company up. But the life is, it's just like, life is much more effortless. I'm not having to struggle with getting out of bed. I don't have to struggle with when you meet difficult people. We all do. They kind of bounce off me, and like those kind of things. just like moving through air. It's just a lot easier than moving through water or mud. And it just feels for me that I'm living in the light, and I can take a moment. My mental health has been challenged in the last 3 years, like everybody else's with the transphobic rises, but with walking in nature, with exercise, with good, with resting, watching Star Trek, doing those things that I do to find space to keep my mental health in good condition. But life, for me, living in joy is living effortlessly. And that's the way I feel now.
Well, so tell me about living in light. Tell me about Global Butterflies.
Well, Global Butterflies was a company that I set up 6 years ago. It started in the legal sector that I was working in. I worked as an operations director at the University of Law. I've done that for 15 years, really enjoyed it. And when I left that role, I felt that the trans visibility, non-binary visibility in law was not good. Less than 2%. 2% of the lawyers are trans, and yet you don't see that. So I decided that I'd set up a company that did inclusion training in the legal sector, and it started off with 101s, HR training, client facing, policy review, all that kind of stuff. And then Emma, my partner now, she was the competition at the time. So I got engaged to her, took her out. That's how you take out the competition, get engaged to them. She came and joined Global Butterflies, and she brought in banking and insurance. And we work in the corporate sector. And the reason we work in the corporate sector is because governments are rubbish at trans and non-binary inclusion, but corporates aren't. They can be really good at it, and they have power to bring about change. And that's why we work and try to make corporate companies into activists and allies, and then they bring about the change because they have much more. And so Global Butterflies works with, right across any business sector, from law firms, banks, insurers, car companies, car rental agencies, anybody that is a big, worldly, complicated company. That's what we work in, because Emma and I both worked in complicated companies, and trans and non-binary people sometimes get left behind in those companies, and quite often don't apply to those companies because they don't think they can thrive. And so Global Butterflies was set up to make sure that companies would recruit trans and non-binary people, allow them to thrive, promote them, look after them, provide healthcare, look after them. And that's what my job is day to day, and I love it.
I like it. To play devil's advocate, aren't you making capitalism cuddly?
Yeah, it is exactly that. I mean, it is, and I do lots of that kind of stuff with them. I think corporates do have, in the new world coming out of lockdown, I think companies are looking at, what are we to the climate? What are we to our workforce? What sort of country do we want to be in? And I think they are moving from, the corporate social responsibility thing, and moving more to corporate social justice, which is we've got morals. We can't just be about making money. I mean, that's important, but we have to be something else. And I think companies are thinking, well, we have to fix the climate, otherwise we're not going to be here. We need to have a diverse workforce because that's good for business. I mean, companies aren't all saints. I mean, they're going to be a diverse workforce because it is good for them as well. But a happy workforce, it just makes it a nicer place to be in. So yeah, I mean, it is making corporate activism palatable and making them bring about the change that we all want to see, because governments won't do that. It's horrible being the government here right now is not great, but the companies that we work with, some of them are really excellent at leverage, at making governments do what they should be doing.
Okay. You said you were getting married.
Yes.
Are you nervous?
Yeah, well, it's like a dry run, really, because we were going to get married in September, and then obviously lockdown came along, and we nudged it to August this year. Yeah, I am. I mean, I've been living with Emma, my partner, for 3 years. We've been together and living here. But yeah, I am a little bit worried. I mean, we've got 100 people coming. It's a big LGBT crowd, which is great. Writing a gender neutral service, and then getting club music from the 1980s, which is very heavy, hard LGBT music from that scene of the 80s, has been a challenge to find the right music for the audience. But it's a party more than a wedding. I think I can't wait. Yeah, but I'm nervous, and I think she'll say yes. I hope so.
Have you got a first dance?
We have. I suppose I can tell you. I mean, the first dance, because none of our guests know, but is The Power of Love by Frankie Goes to Hollywood. It'll be our first dance, which we both love that song. So we both came on it at the same time. Went, oh, that could be the first dance. So first dance. walking down the aisle to Elvis Presley. So,
Not suspicious minds, I hope.
no, not quite.
Rachel Reese, thank you very much.
This is me. My name is Craig Thomas.
When did you first realize you wanted to act?
Oh boy. Really, it's really cliche, but I would say my whole life. I mean, when I was a little kid, I used to make skits with the neighborhood friends. Always in school, I was in drama class and drama club, and in high school, I was in the drama club president. So actually, my mother found an article when I was in maybe junior high school, a spotlight on Craig Thomas and a star in the making and all of that stuff. So it's pretty cliche, Gareth, but it's really been in my blood. It's been something I've been doing really my whole life.
And how do you turn that kind of dream into a reality? What are the sort of pragmatic things you have to do?
Right. So I was in drama competitions in high school, and I met a young guy that was pretty much kind of becoming a young movie star, and he really liked my work, and he said, you should consider being a professional actor. You should come and meet my agent, and I did, and the guy signed me up. So I kind of went from an actor doing stuff in high school for free to out there auditioning in the real world.
And was it everything we see in the kind of silver screen? Is it all glamorous and wonderful?
It's curious, because I mentioned I've been kind of at this since the late 80s, and I was telling someone the other day about my first professional acting job. There was a show called The White Shadow, and it was a basketball. It was an inner city basketball show where the coach was a white coach that was coaching young African American inner city guys, and I had a small part. It was my first gig, and the scene actually took place on a basketball court. And being that I was a young Black guy, it must have been 17. No one asked me if I could play basketball. They just assumed that I could because I was Black, and I can't, and I couldn't. So the scene took place where, I'm supposed to be like shooting hoops, and we were kind of practicing the scene before it started. And I think, the producers and directors and everyone on set realized this guy can't play basketball. So they just changed the scene. They took the basketball out of my hand and gave me a bag lunch. So I was supposed to be eating my sandwich after the basketball practice. So that was kind of the introduction to the real world for me, about assumptions about, African Americans, and not even going into the world of being, a gay Black young boy. But right from the beginning, I had to learn to try to fit in, I think generally my whole trajectory as a young actor and as a working actor was to hide. And that from my very first gig, I felt like I was kind of found out, because, hey, a young Black guy should be cool and hip and know how to play basketball. And this young Black gay boy didn't.
How did that feel? That idea that you needed to hide with yourself, or the assumptions that were made? How does that make you feel as a young person? As a Black girl, as a Black gay guy, or a gay Black guy?
Exactly, that too. I was thinking about my early days, and I started out in the 90s, and I really started out in 1988. I did a Friday the 13th. And then after that, I worked a lot in TV, and I'm blessed because I did work, but fear, I was so fearful of being seen. And particularly at that time in the 90s, if you were young and Black and male, most of the roles you went out for were like young gang members. So I grew up kind of middle class, very suburban middle class upbringing. And 90% of the roles I was going out for were, urban thugs. So there was a lot of impostoring going on in those early days, and a lot of a lot of fear that it was a very frustrating time for me, because I found myself to be I had the talent, I had the skills, but I had to kind of, when I walked into that audition room, I really worked overtime to not have them see the real me, which is really counterintuitive for an artist. Our work is to open our hearts and be seen. And so those early years, those formative years in the business were really peppered by a lot of shame and fear.
And how did you move past that shame and fear?
Well, I look back on the roles that I got, and many times I was cast as characters that weren't specifically written for an African American. It's when in the 2000s they started to kind of broaden the horizon. Also, I was getting older, so I was coming out of that teenage phase. And casting, I think back then they thought, well, only young Black guys on TV and movies, they must be inner city gang members. As you start to get into your early 20s and 20s, then you could start to play young other characters. So I really kind of found my niche in playing other characters that were a little bit more two-dimensional as opposed to fully one-dimensional characters. Yeah.
And what sorts of characters were those?
Yeah, those were young dad, young doctor. As you start to get into your 30s, you can, and then as we went into the 2000s, then, we could be young lawyers, and you get a little bit older, then you can play, detectives, and they tended to be, if not one-dimensional, two-dimensional characters, not fully lived. But Gareth, I've only mentioned the area of race, but I'm also double carded, so I haven't mentioned anything about gay characters. It was non-existent. They really did not really exist as I was, starting out in the business and working in the business. I mean, I was working overtime and found myself very frustrated just finding an African-American character that I felt was not degrading. So I was working toward that, being very frustrated about that, and then hiding who I was as a gay man because that was not represented. And doubly frustrated because, hey, there's a lot of gay people in the industry, a lot, all up and down the food chain, from casting to producing, directing, and actors, and even on set. But the rub is that you have to hide that. There were times when I heard that gay casting directors were actually the worst because they would say, I think that guy is gay, and I don't want to jeopardize my job on this production as a gay casting director who brings in a gay actor to play a straight role, because we're talking about straight roles at this point. Gay roles just really didn't exist except for comic relief or tragic sentiment. So, yeah.
Have you noticed a change in the industry more recently?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, so my trajectory, I quit the business for a while. I quit the business a couple of times. So since high school to my 30s, I was completely devoted, and as my career grew, the roles that I was getting increased, and I was starting to tap into that area of maybe a series regular, or really a larger part on in a movie, and I knew at that point that it was going to be harder and harder to hide who I was. And I made a decision that, do I stay and become and just be an openly gay Black actor, which at that time there was not one. I mean, I had no role models. I had no one that like, oh, I'm gonna be that, or that courageous person, I'm gonna follow in those footsteps. Really, there was none. And not to make myself sound like, wow, you're all that, but I really said, am I gonna be the first one to do it? Because I can't see myself, doing a press junket, going out promoting a project and hiding who I was. It was horrible. It was already horrible doing it on auditions. It was horrible being on set, hiding who I was. And I thought, this is only going to get worse. So I decided to quit the business. So I quit. I moved to New York. A friend of mine had a very successful licensing company, extremely successful. In fact, he was a licensing mogul and got the rights to the Teletubbies, actually. So, which was huge at that time. So he had a very successful business, and he hired me to work for his company. So I moved to New York, and most of the people in LA thought I had moved to New York to pursue, to continue with my acting career, but I actually stopped my acting career and worked in the business sector. And I was in New York during 9/11, and I met someone in Canada at that time, and decided to move to Montreal. And when I did that move, that's when people were very interested. Why is this black guy lived from the States moving to Montreal? And I kind of told people my story. And at that time, there were a lot of American productions that were filming in Canada in general, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal. So I actually kind of kickstarted my career back again in Canada with a certain niche that I was an African American actor with U.S. credit. So so I started that in Montreal, but Montreal is a very special city, and Quebec is a very special province. So I didn't have the baggage that I had in Hollywood. I felt very free there. So so I had a kind of a career there. And I worked in movie and a lot of TV shows, a lot of American TV shows and movies that filmed in Montreal. And I played gay characters in certain of those projects, which I think that's very telling on two folds, that I felt more comfortable on my skin, and that there were gay roles for Black actors at that point.
Mm-hmm. So do you think it makes you a better actor being out?
Yes, I pause. I really want to let that soak in. That's an interesting question. I think it makes me a scene actor. When I've always taken acting class and I've always been like, the rock star actor, and many people were always very curious why my career wasn't further along. And I think that was because in class, people knew who I was, and I was just free. But in the real world, there was a part of myself who was hiding. So what has happened, I decided, my parents were getting older. My father got diagnosed with cancer, stage 4 cancer. And so I decided to move back to LA. That's how come I'm back here. So once again, everyone who knew me in Canada just figured, well, obviously Craig went back to LA to further his illustrious career. And I actually freaked out coming back here, because it triggered all the pain, the trauma that I experienced being here as a young actor.
And how did you move through that?
Therapy.
Or you're moving through that? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a process, isn't it?
It is, and you know, therapy, really, because I knew that I needed to work through the things that were stopping me when I was here before, because it really triggered it all. It came, it like the floodgates reopened, and all the fear, and for me to kind of say, wow, I was afraid to see and be seen. That really came from my work in therapy and so it's been, so that's what I've been doing since I've been back here in LA, just really working on being comfortable in my own skin.
And it's working.
Yeah. And curiously enough, you know, I've been pursued by agents. I've been pursued, you know, to start, and I really haven't felt ready. Also, because my plate has been full. You know, I was dealing with my father's cancer and helping him with his journey. He did lose his battle with the disease, and then right around that time, my mother was diagnosed with dementia. So I've been really dealing with a lot of big ticket items in these last 4 years.
Does that give you a perspective on everything you've achieved and how, you know, you might be the role model that younger gay Black men are looking up to, Black gay men?
Right. Well, I feel like it's been my greatest role to date. I mean, an acting career can really be, you can really be in your own bubble. It's about me and my feelings and my career and my auditions and yada, yada, yada. And, you know, giving oneself to, it feels like full circle. Like now I've been there to care for my parents, and it's been very rewarding. It's been very challenging, but it's been some of the most rewarding time of my life. Yeah. And so a very good friend of mine from Montreal who had moved here to LA with her husband wrote a short film. Well, actually it was a web series that she wrote, and she wrote a part, it wasn't a little part, but she wrote a part for me playing her best gay friend. And we did a trailer for that series, and the woman that directed that became a fan of my work and wrote her first feature film, and had contacted my friend who connected us and said, I've written this part. I think that Craig would be great for it. So she reached out to me, and she said, look, I love your work. I think you'd be perfect in this role. You know, put yourself on tape. I just want to just kind of pitch you to the directors, to the other producers and the casting director. And actually got the part. And so I just filmed that. I was two and a half weeks on location filming this amazing, great, smart film that's peppered with a lot of really talented working actors. And I'm playing a gay character in a really beautiful gay relationship that has a journey. It's been a real blessing that it feels like it's my time, you know. It feels like reclaiming my time. It feels like there's a full circle. And if I'm being honest with you, when I read the script, not only did I think it was wickedly funny, I loved all the characters, and I loved my character, and I loved my boyfriend's character and our relationship together. I really did. I felt I would be so darn lucky and blessed to be part of this project. And then I got it. And then I realized, because you never know with these kind of projects, I mean, it could be quite successful. And the notion of, oh, I'm playing openly gay, full formed character. in a world where I kind of, ran away with my tail between my legs. So it's once again, it's another kind of full circle journey.
So one final question. If
Yes.
the Craig now could give advice to the Craig way back then, who was in the drama magazine, the star of the future, what would he say to him?
Be brave. Fuck them. Basically. Really, it's that fear, man. It's self-sabotaging, Yes, there would have been roles that I didn't get. I remember once when I did take therapy once when I was in LA in the thralls of all this, because it just bugged me. The fear, the crippling fear, particularly in the area of auditioning. And I had therapy that morning, and I had an audition. I went straight to this audition, and I was so comfortable in my body that my agent, after the audition, called the casting director to see how it went, and the casting director said that I was very good, and that the casting director told my agent, who was openly gay, that he could tell that I was gay, or that something about that he got a gay vibe. And I remember being kind of mortified that I got that comment, but also really proud of myself. Yes, the character was not gay, and maybe maybe I was a little light in my loafers in that moment, but I love the fact that I was not hiding, that I was in that room really in my body and with myself, just really super relaxed. And honestly, Gareth, I think as I continue on in this journey, I think that's really what I'm going to be focusing on, is just showing up, because I don't want to just do gay characters, openly or not. I want to, and I've always played all different types of roles, and I like to continue to do that.
Okay, Craig Thomas, thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Tabby Lamb, and this is me.
Tell me about Bernadette.
So when I was younger, I was a member of the local village amateur dramatic society. We did a pantomime every Christmas, and there was a review every spring. And that's where I first met Bernadette. Bernadette was the musical director for the pantomime. So she would teach us all of the songs. She would help us practice. She would be playing piano. And after a few months, I remember I was in IT class in year 7, and one of the boys in my class, who was also in the amateur dramatics group and lived in my village, turned to me and whispered, "Did you know Bernadette's a man?" And Bernadette wasn't a man, but Bernadette was trans, and we didn't have the words for it. It was, what year will it have been? It will have been 2001. And Bernadette was already at that point in her 60s at least. And she had been part of the amateur dramatics group for as long as I could remember. And it turns out that before I joined and before I was a member and before she transitioned, she was there as well. And she was always, it was never mentioned. It was always so accepted and such a part of village life. She was integral to that society, to the shows we did, to the songs that we put in them. And I remember she introduced me to musicals, which I now write and am part of that world myself. And the first time I heard a song from Cabaret was when she put the song Cabaret into our production of Sleeping Beauty, in which I played the king. I was an 11-year-old king and a panto dame was my queen. It was a very odd production. But I remember a mixture of awe and terror when I heard about Bernadette. The awe at her, what I didn't realize then, but was her truth. And I mean, I hate it when people call me brave for being trans, but I was in awe of her bravery. But I was also terrified about those feelings within myself and what that meant for my future. But I do think that knowing Bernadette and having Bernadette in my life profoundly changed the way that I viewed gender. And we never talked about gender. We never talked about her transition. We never talked about transness. In fact, I don't think I spoke to her really that much at all. But she had a huge impact on me. And a few years ago, I learned that she'd passed away. And I just learned more about her and her life, actually, after her death. I learned about her wife and how they divorced when she transitioned because legally they weren't allowed to be married. But then 34 years later, when Bernadette finally got her gender recognition certificate legally, and when civil partnerships came into law, how they remarried and how they lived together forever, and everyone just accepted them, and they were so in love and so lovely. And I just think that she showed me that it was possible to be successful, because she had a really high-powered job as well. She was like a scientist or an engineer or something like that for the government, whilst also playing the piano for this Amdram group. And she was trans, and she was chill, and she wasn't a predator or a danger or a man in a dress or any of those cliches. She was one of the most graceful and feminine people who I ever met. And she was just,
both things.
yeah, she was just a lovely woman.
And now that your future is your now, as it were, tell us about that.
So I still work in theatre. I write plays and musicals and TV. And I think a lot of that was inspired by not just Bernadette, but everyone else within the amateur dramatics group and the other youth theatres that I went to. But recently, well, in the past year, I've been thinking a lot about Bernadette, because I've been thinking a lot about trans elders and how I'm only 31, but I get called a trans elder by a lot of the young people who I mentor. And I find it so ridiculous that I'm called a trans elder when there are so many actual trans elders out there, but there's also nowhere near as many as they should be. It's in a similar way to elderly gay men. We lost generations of our history and our family. And to see a happy trans woman doing well so young, I think really it showed me that I can do that. And I'm engaged, I'm in a relationship with a wonderful, wonderful person, and my career is going well. And I'm really passionate about showing stories about queer people thriving, and stories about queer joy, and stories about gender euphoria, and stories that show the importance of intergenerational relationships. So I've actually just written a play called The Village Hall, inspired by my times at amateur dramatics, and there's a character called Bernadette. And I've invented a trans mask teenage character who Bernadette sort of mentors and protects and looks after, whilst also being inspired by their youth and their optimism and their knowledge. Because I think the way that when I need to learn things about my transition, I can go on Google, I can search things, I can look up whether it's surgeon reviews or whether it's hormone side effects. I can look up all of that. And Bernadette transitioned before the internet, before any of that was possible. And part of me thinks that that's absolutely amazing, and how incredible that must have been. And to be able to transition when there wasn't this huge negative dialogue within the media, when we were sort of thought of as, I guess, a weird little fringe that didn't really matter, as opposed to something dangerous and nasty and evil. But then also I think of the community that I found online, whether it's through Twitter or through the queers meetup groups that I run on Zoom and things like that. So I'm torn between being jealous of her and also slightly feeling sorry for her that she never got to see or live through the now and the current wave, because even though there is this negativity in the media, we're also so much more visible and so much more accountable than we ever were, which I think is really important.
So let's say there's someone out there watching who needs their Bernadette. What would you say to them?
I would say, hi, I'm Tabby. I'm not that old, but maybe to you I am. Maybe to you I seem very, very old and like an actual grown-up. But there are people out there who are like you and who you can talk to, who you can reach out to, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's through organizations like Gendered Intelligence or Spectra or Stonewall or anywhere who holds queer youth groups, and know that your transness and your queerness is your superpower. It's not something to be scared of or something that makes you wrong. It's something that makes you special and something that makes you powerful and something that you can embrace. All of my work, all of my writing comes from my gender. It comes from embracing who I am, being proud of who I am, and sharing that joy with the world. And I've managed to make a vaguely successful career out of it. And I know that you will too. And if you need a fairy tran mum, just give me a call.
Tabby Lamb, thank you very much.